I'd like to welcome you this morning. My name is Susan Brooks Young. I was in public and private education as a classroom teacher and as a site administrator for more years than I care to think about. The last few years, I've been working independently in individual schools and with school districts and with ministries of education on a variety of different things, all related to the effective use of technology in classrooms. And one of the things that has continued to be an issue, it was an issue when I was a teacher, it was an issue when I was a principal, and it's still an issue, is teachers are told you need to do things differently. But nobody ever says what that looks like. Nobody ever says how to go about doing it. It's like you're supposed to wake up one morning and the lesson planning fairy danced at the foot of your bed the night before while you were sleeping, and suddenly you know what that looks like. So I'm going to show you some tools that will help you do that, and that you can take back to school, and that you can share with your colleagues that will help them as well. Does that sound like what you thought you were getting into, or is it because the room next door is locked and they won't let you in? This is what you need. Okay, great. How many classroom teachers are actually in the room right now? Just quick show of hands. Oh, great. Okay, good. How many administrators, site administrators, are in the room? Wonderful. How many district level people who help teachers? Okay, quite a few of you as well. And state level or county or other kind of regional? A few of you. Okay, but everybody who's here wants to help teachers, right? Perfect. Okay, then we have the right audience, we're in the right spot, and we're going to go ahead and get started. And there's three things that we're going to be covering this morning in this hour. First one is we're going to do a little activity, modified somewhat, that's going to help establish common ground, because it's one of the things that I found, particularly as a principal, was sometimes difficult. We would all talk about things as though we agreed on what we were talking about. And then we would find out that no, we really weren't talking about the same thing at all. If you doubt that, try to get a group of teachers to define the term at risk. Just give it a try sometime. The second thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you some frameworks and models that are readily available that your teachers may even already be, or you as teachers may already be familiar with, but we're going to talk about it in a slightly different context. And then finally, we'll talk about how you can take that information to change the way you develop activities. There is the online agenda. The link that I gave you takes you to a splash page that gives you links to all of the sessions that I'm doing here at Q. And if you click on that top link, go ahead, try. We can bring the whole network down. But I'll show you what's there. Everything we do is linked here. It will remain there until I can retire, which is an ever-moving target going that way. So before it gets taken down, it will be out of date and old hat, and something else will have taken its place. But it's there, you're welcome to use it. And I'll keep referring back to this as we go through. You're welcome, if you want to look more closely at things as I talk about them. But if you want to just sit back and let it wash over you, please feel free to let that happen too. You don't have to be online to get the benefit out of what we're going to be doing. All of you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And when I went to teacher school, basically what we were told was if kids don't have food, clothing, and shelter, you're going to have a terrible time getting them to focus on anything else. Now there's a new hierarchy that you may not have seen. Can you relate? Okay. So when we talk about technology-supported instruction and we talk about dealing with the kinds of issues that impede effective use of technology in the classroom, we do have to recognize that those two new needs definitely do have an impact on whether or not our kids and our teachers are having a good, sound educational experience. Infrastructure matters. It's really important. But there are other things that are really important too. I'm really glad to see so many administrators in the room, because leadership makes a huge difference. There was just another study that came out very recently on a project up in Northern California. In the schools where the principals attended the training, there was much more implementation of the training than those schools where the principals were too busy to come. And I know principals are busy people. I was one. But we have an impact that we don't necessarily always understand. So it's really important that principals, assistant principals, district office people, whoever is promoting an initiative, you need to put your money where your mouth is, and you need to be there. Another thing that matters is community support. A couple of years ago, well, more than a couple of years ago now, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was a district in Colorado that had a one-to-one initiative, and the school handed out equipment to the kids. They talked to the teachers, they talked to the district level people, they talked to the kids, they forgot to talk to the parents. So the first time something went south because a 6th grade boy acted like a 6th grade boy, went to Starbucks and got himself on a website you probably would prefer none of your children looked at anytime soon. His father's reaction was, it's the school's fault. Because he didn't know anything about the program. He did not understand how it was structured. The insane outcome of that was the Colorado State Legislature passed a law that said if a school district could not guarantee that a child would never be able to access an inappropriate website, regardless of where that child was, using school-provided equipment, the school couldn't provide the equipment. What do you think happened to ed tech in Colorado for 2 years? It was non-existent. They did eventually rescind the law because they came to their senses and realized that that was kind of ridiculous. But in the meantime, think about the amount of damage that was done because the parents had not been informed of what was going on. But even with that, your top priority, whether you are a teacher or an administrator or in some other kind of role in the educational system, your top priority has to be professional development. Would you agree? And it has to be timely, and it needs to be meaningful, it needs to be ongoing, and the teachers need to have follow-up support. That's not cheap. But without it, you're always going to have issues. Now, having said that, I'm going to show you some stuff that you can do on your own, at your site, in your district, that will be helpful. But again, please plan to incorporate the level of professional development that you need. Okay, now, if there were 30 of you, I would put you into teams of 3 or 4. And I would ask you to introduce yourselves, and I would ask you to talk about what you do, and then I would ask you all to identify one common use of technology that you see at your school. Now, I'm still going to ask you to do that part, but I'm not going to ask you to do the recording part, and I'll show you that. It's the brainstorming activity 1 link, and what I've done is I've set up a Google Sheet. A Google Sheet is a great way to gather input from people in meetings or in professional development sessions, in classrooms, anytime you want to get people contributing their ideas. So that we have kind of a sample. I'm going to just point at some people, and they are going to be fake teams. If this works, that'll be great. If it doesn't work, don't hate me. Joyce, would you be team 1 with whoever you talk with? I don't know anybody else in the room. Would you be team 2 with whoever you talk to? Okay. You're going to be team 3 with whoever you talk to. You'll be team 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This gentleman right here in the black t-shirt, you're team 9. And you're team 10. Okay? Okay, so now, here's what you do. You turn to shoulder partners. You might have to move. 2 or 3 people, maybe 4 in a group tops. And I want you to talk very briefly about what are the common uses you see of technology at your school. If you are in one of the teams that were volunteered to replicate this for you, you are going to have a typist, the person I pointed to, and you are going to put in the first names of the people who you talked with, and you're going to put in some of the ideas that you brainstormed. And we're only going to take a couple of minutes to do this. So is everybody clear on your first task? Okay. I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I think that will be ample time. Go. I want to talk for a second about how the activity is structured. The activity is structured so that I don't have to know exactly what people are doing or talking about. I can look without even being able to read the text and know which teams have done what I asked them to do. They may have typed in things I wasn't looking for, but they put in something. Everybody who is sitting in the room who has an internet-connected device who's looking at this document, this spreadsheet, can now see what's there. So there's none of this squinting around, I can't see what was on the screen, sort of thing. And everybody can see all the ideas that were posted, except right now they can't because I need to make things bigger, so I will. So if you're doing this in a meeting or you're doing this with kids in a classroom, it's an easy monitoring tool, and it's also a way to be more inclusive and get those people who may not normally contribute to a conversation engaged in the conversation. And you can keep this. You can lock it down so that it can't be edited. You can reopen it at subsequent meetings, and you can have this as a living document as opposed to those charts that I know I, as a principal, used to have hang on the wall. People would write on it, I'd roll it up, throw it in my closet, and I got rid of them when I quit my job. Right? Okay. So what you have then is a living document that you can continue to go back to, and that you can continue to refine and you can continue to work on. So now, some of the ideas, and this is also nice for discussion, is once you've gotten responses, you can start looking for patterns in the kinds of things that people added. So because we may not have everybody in the room looking at the internet, I'm just going to run through some of the common ideas that you added. Things like using, going online, using math programs and grade books and Read 180 or Plato or Google. Intervention kinds of activities, covering core subjects, doing the Google stuff, classroom management, and I'm skipping around now, collecting data, parent communication, diversifying your instruction, using multimedia resources, project-based learning, reading apps, research, keyboarding, that sort of thing. In what I named, what patterns do you see in the kinds of activities that were typically being listed? That was not a rhetorical question. Yes. A lot of teacher-directed stuff. Anything else that you notice? Or like computer-assisted instruction? Yes. Right, same old stuff, It's just been automated. Substitution level of SAMR. Would everybody agree that that tends to be the kind of thing when you start to talk about what you commonly see? Hold on to that thought, because we're going to come back to that in a few minutes, which is also one reason why I like to use this, because it's a very nice way to help people see, record, and come back and think some more about what they've seen. Another thing I learned about when I went to teacher school was Bloom's taxonomy. Y'all remember Bloom's taxonomy? You probably saw it in Methods 101 and may or may not have thought about it ever again. Yeah? Benjamin Bloom actually was a pretty smart guy. And what he was trying to do back in 1955 when he developed the first taxonomy was he was trying to help teachers ask better questions. One of the things I learned when I taught kindergarten was I had to be very, very careful, because what I was doing was teaching my kids how to answer questions that were framed a certain way. And as long as I asked them the question using the language I had used to teach the idea, they could answer the question. But the minute I tried to get them to extrapolate, to use that information in a different kind of environment, they couldn't do it. Because they didn't transfer the knowledge. Now, as kids get older, that's less of a problem. But if you're drilling kids on how to pass a standardized test, and they're learning the language they need to pass that test, do not be shocked when they can't take that information and instead of talking about apples, switch to talking about palm trees, because they don't understand that there's any connection. So Bloom was trying to help people do a better job of making up the kinds of questions that would help kids not get caught in that trap. The original taxonomy had 6 levels as it does now, but the names of the levels were nouns rather than verbs. And the top 2 levels were flipped. He thought that evaluating was the highest order thinking skill rather than creating. Then in the late 1990s, one of his former students said, you know, things have changed a bit since 1955. Maybe we ought to rethink the taxonomy. And that was when they changed the level names to verbs. And they flipped the top 2 because one of the things technology does is it allows us to do things in terms of creation that we could not do with kids easily or well 50 years ago. So now creating is at the top of the taxonomy. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that one of the things that's really important to do with your kids is try to get them above remembering, understanding, and even applying, because that's where much of what we do ends up. If you think about the kinds of things that were listed as frequent common uses of technology, where would they fall? In the first 2 levels, right? And there's a lot of research that shows that until you get to analyzing, evaluating, and creating, it doesn't matter whether or not you're using technology, it has no impact on student learning. So now I'm going to show you some resources, because that was your whole set of instruction for this morning on Bloom's taxonomy. But I have a bunch of resources for you that you can go to and share with your colleagues back at school. Are any of you familiar with Bag the Web? Okay, this is an aside. It's a free curation tool. I use it in place of Pinterest, because with Pinterest, you've got to have an image. And you always run the risk with that image of it not being an image you want to use with your kids. Or you run the risk of having a site you really want to use and it doesn't have an image to grab from. But with Bag the Web, you don't have to have an image. So I have a bag for you here of resources that are all related to Bloom's taxonomy. And I'm not going to go through them now, other than just to say, here they are. And you are welcome when you're back at your site to look at these and see if there's anything there that would be useful for you and your teachers. So then the next thing that we're going to put into that mix is the SAMR model. How many of you are familiar with the SAMR model already? Quite a few of you, but still only about half. I'm going to show you a video that you're going to have a link to. It's just 2 minutes and explains SAMR very quickly and gives you a chance to listen to somebody besides me.
This is the SAMR model in 120 seconds. The SAMR model is a framework that provides a lens for viewing technology integration in the classroom. The first level is substitution, or the idea that a block is a block no matter where it is or how you access it. This would be like using Google Docs as any other word processor. The new tech replaces the old tech, but it does not change the task. The next level is augmentation. At this level, the tech is still a substitute, but provides more functionality as students work to complete the same task. The ability to share your Google Doc in one click and the fact that it saves to the cloud automatically and provides you access from anywhere is an increase in functionality. The next level is modification. Here the ball really gets rolling because the technology is used to redesign parts of the task and transform student learning. Students collaborating on one Google Doc and using the comment feature to provide instant feedback is an example of modification. The final level of SAMR is redefinition. At this level, we're able to design and create new tasks that were once unimaginable. By shifting our perspective from technology just being another block or substitute, we're able to truly start imagining the possibilities. An example of redefinition would be connecting to a classroom across the world through students sharing Google Docs. They would each write their own narrative of the same historical event, using the chat and comment section to discuss the differences. Then students would use the Voice Comments app to discuss the differences they noticed and embed this in their class website as a culture walk. To recap, substitution is the same task, new tech replaces old tech. Augmentation is the same task, but the tech increases functionality. Modification, we're able to redesign parts of the task. Redefinition, we're able to create new tasks once unimaginable. As we move from substitution to redefinition, we're moving from enhancing to transforming student learning. This is the SAMR model in 120 seconds.
She does a nice job of explaining it and very quickly. And there are a couple of things I want to say to you about this before we go any further. The first one is, please do not walk away from here thinking I'm saying you always need to get to modification and redefinition. I am not saying that. It would be exhausting, and it would take you way too much time. Okay? That's not the point. The point is, if you are never getting there, and many teachers are not, and many administrators don't know they should be, that's when you run into difficulty. It's okay to say, I'm going to do an activity with the kids that's at substitution or augmentation, as long as you've made a conscious decision that that's what you're doing, and you recognize that's what you're doing. And you're doing it because it automates things, it makes things easier, classroom management goes more smoothly. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But don't think you're effectively integrating technology. You're making your life a little bit easier. And that's fine. Okay? But understand that when you're working at those two enhancement levels, once again, if your kids do better academically, it had nothing to do with whether or not they were using technology. It's not until you get to the transformation level, which looks a lot like project-based learning and constructivism. That's when the use of technology can be attributed, or use of technology can be attributed to increased student performance and to actual transformation of learning in the classroom. Okay? So it's not a judgment, and do not walk out of here thinking you've got to get to redefinition or bust. That's not the idea. Also, it's important to know this is only the most recent manifestation of research that's been around since 1995. SRI did a study of the Apple Classrooms of Tomorrow program that ran from 1985 to 1995, and they identified 5 levels. But it was the same thing. You go through substituting, you go through augmenting, you go through modifying, and then you get to redefinition. They just called the levels something else. There was the low T research. Same thing, 5 levels. So this is nothing new, even though the guy who developed this might want you to think it is. It's not. But I think there's something good about that. That means it's really solid, it's been proven, and over time, this is what keeps turning up, okay? So, just as we had a framework, or Bag the Web, for the Bloom's Revised Taxonomy, there's also a Bag the Web collection for SAMR resources, including a link to the video that I just showed you. So if you want to go back and show the video with your colleagues, it's right there for you to get to. There's a number of other videos. There are some links to various blogs about SAMR, and also some examples, because people often say to me, really? What does that look like? I don't understand. And so in there, you'll find some actual direct examples, and I'm actually realizing that there is one thing I want to show you that is an example that often resonates with people, and it's the second link in the bag. That's how you explain SAMR to coffee drinkers. So if you're looking for a new way to try to show folks what it's about, you may run this by them and see if that helps them better understand. I want you now to think about the examples that you gave, and if you're one of the teams that's typing, go ahead and type this next part into your team row, and if you are not one of the teams that was typing, just simply identify what levels do the uses that you suggested or that you talked about, where do they fall on Bloom's taxonomy, and where would that put them with SAMR? And we're just going to take like 2 minutes to do that. So go ahead, talk to the people you were talking with before. So what we're looking at right now is, and this is not judgment, okay? This is just like figuring out where you really are. What would you say, whether or not you were actually adding something to the spreadsheet? And if you are adding to the spreadsheet and haven't had a chance to do that, please go ahead and do that. What would you say when you went back and actually looked at what you were talking about? Where did it fall on the taxonomy? The lower levels. Did most of you find that what you typically see happening in classrooms are remembering, understanding kinds of things? Okay. And you know what? That's not your fault. What kind of professional development do you typically get when it comes to using technology? What kinds of things do you usually get taught? Basic use of a program or of a tool, correct? PowerPoint 101 ad nauseum, right? If all you ever get is that entry level, low level, you don't have time to plan, you don't have time to think, you don't ever get it modeled for you, how are you supposed to do it? If you could have figured it out, you would have figured it out by now, right? You're not dumb. You're smart people, right? It's not as easy as some folks would like to make it seem to be. So you need to have the kind of professional development that's going to help you move from those lower 3 levels of the taxonomy to those upper levels of the taxonomy. You need the kind of professional development that's going to help you, when it's appropriate, develop activities that are at modification and redefinition rather than always functioning at those lower levels on the SAMR model. But you also need, administrators, you need to perk your ears up on this one, you need permission to do it the right way. I don't know a teacher who is going to stick his or her neck out to do some kind of activity that's going to be noisy, it's going to be messy. The kids may not do what you thought they were going to do. The outcome may be completely different from what you thought it was going to be. Teachers need to have permission to go down that rabbit hole. If everything has to be perfect, if everybody has to succeed every time, if not achieving what you thought you were going to achieve is looked at as a problem, you're never going to see teachers get there, because I wouldn't do that. Would any of you? Of course not. So you've got to have the support you need, and you've got to be working in an environment that's going to allow you to take risks and not punish you for being the risk taker. Right, teachers? Yeah, okay. So now we're going to look at a framework. And we're going to talk about how you take everything that we have looked at so far and do something with it. How many of you are familiar with the TPACK framework? Very few of you. Okay. I'm going to show you another 2-minute video to explain it quickly.
Here's TPACK in 2 minutes. For more information, visit tpack.org. So first we have to ask, what is it? Well, TPACK is a framework that combines 3 knowledge areas: our technological knowledge, content knowledge, and our pedagogical knowledge. And it looks at how they work together to increase student motivation and to make the content more accessible to students. We look at the content as the what. It's the subject matter we're teaching, like ecology, music, algebra, health, geometry, or art history, to name a few. Then we look at our pedagogical knowledge. It's the how. Every teacher has tools, so let's put them to use. Are we going to be using direct instruction? Will this be inquiry-based, group discussions? How are we going to make the content more accessible by the way we present it to our students? Then we look at selecting the appropriate technology, because it's the partner. What tool will we select to make the content more accessible to the students while supporting the pedagogical strategy which we've identified will help to deliver this information to students? We must identify those support features to really help us use technology to reach our outcome. As we understand them individually, we can start to see overlaps. Our TP knowledge allows us to understand how we're making the content more accessible. Our TC knowledge allows us to identify the affordances of pairing the appropriate technology to the content. And our PC knowledge allows us to identify the affordances of pairing the appropriate pedagogical strategies with the content. TPACK comes from the overlapping in that center spot, or as we refer to it as the sweet spot, when all 3 knowledge areas work together. It's crucial to remember that surrounding this is the context. That's you and your students. This may look differently when you walk into classrooms, because at the heart of TPACK is meeting students' needs.
Okay, so basically then what it's doing is looking at lesson planning in a different kind of way. It's veteran teachers are very, very, very good at content and at pedagogy. We know that stuff inside out, forwards and backwards. Less experienced teachers who are of a certain age are really good at the technology for personal use. And they've got some of the instructional strategy ideas down. They know the content from nothing, because they've got to learn. And so what happens when you put yourself in an environment where you're going to try to create technology-supported instruction and something goes wrong, the veteran teacher almost inevitably falls back on, well, I'll just do the content and the pedagogy. I'll do what I always did, because it works, okay? The problem with that is, while it is true that we could take the kids outside and we could sit them down somewhere in an olive grove and we could teach them and they would learn, we'd mostly be teaching them how to be effective citizens in ancient Athens. We have to bring in the tools that they're going to be living with, okay? The problem with less experienced teachers, when things don't work, they say, I know the technology, I know how to capture these kids' interests, and the next thing you know, they're doing something way out in left field that is a lot of fun, but it has nothing to do with your objectives for the day, right? So what you need to do is you need to start thinking more about what do you do to get all three of those things functioning at the same time. It's like juggling. You can juggle 2 balls, no problem. Put in the third, you start dropping stuff. You need to start figuring out a better strategy for what to do when something falls. And you can do that. You can plan ahead. It's like having a mental fire drill. We practice what to do when the building is burning down. What do you do when it's metaphorically burning down? Okay? And that's not something that you just pull out of the air. There are actually resources that can help you do that. And you probably have guessed already that I've got a bag that is set up for that. And it's here under Resources TPACK Framework. There are a lot of links in there, but the one I want to point out to you right now is the second one down, which is called the Learning Activity Types website. This is a wiki that comes from the College of William and Mary School of Education, recently updated. And what they do is they take content areas. If you look off here on the left side of the screen, you see that it runs from K-6 literacy through math, music, PE, all the way down through world languages. And this is K-12. Except for the K-6 literacy, which is obviously K-6. But what this does then, if you click on one of these links, I'm going to do math, you get either 2 or 3 options for a document that you can download. In mathematics, they offer you English, Spanish, and Chinese. I'm going to go with English because we're on a short schedule here. And every single one of these resources is framed exactly the same way. So there's consistency throughout all the documents. You start scrolling down. The first table that you run into is at the remembering level of the taxonomy. So if you're just getting started and you're wanting to think about how could I create a lesson where I focused equally on content, on pedagogy, and on the technology that I might use to support that, you can come here and you can look. And the pedagogy that's in the first row is attending to a demonstration. It tells you what that looks like, and you already know you're in math, so you've got your content. And then in the final column, it says, these are some of the technologies you could use to support this kind of activity at this level. So it's not saying there's anything wrong with you if you're operating at the understanding level. It says, that's cool, that's fine. But if you're going to do it at that level, make a conscious decision, that's what you're doing, and then do the best job you can with what's at your disposal as you're doing that. As you scroll further down, then again, these are all things that are very low level. You get to the next level. These are things at the understanding level of the taxonomy. So it's things like doing computation or drilling and practicing or solving a puzzle. Still low level, but it talks to you about what that looks like and what kind of technology you could use to support that while you were doing it. By the time you get to the creating level of the taxonomy, you've looked through all those other tables. It talks about doing things like having the kids teach a lesson instead of you, or have them create a plan for something, or have them develop a product where they're actually working at the highest level of the taxonomy. What does that look like? What might be the technology-based tools you could use to make that happen? Would it be helpful to have something like this? And you could pick any content area. You don't have the English teacher saying, I don't see anything there for me, because there's something there for every content area. Now, what I do when I'm working in schools is I have teachers take time to go through the chart that relates to what they teach. And then I ask them to think about, what do they see in the charts that reflect things they do all the time? What do they see in the charts that they wish they were doing more of? And you can probably imagine what they're doing all the time is the stuff at the lower levels. What they wish they were doing more of is the stuff at the more complex levels. And again, it doesn't mean you have to always be at the higher levels, but what it does mean is please get there occasionally. And be intentional about what you're doing when you do it. So this is linked there for you. And you can go, these are PDF files, so you can distribute them freely. They're all in the public domain. You can do with them whatever you would like to do. So I'm going to ask you just to think for a second. If you were now going to think about, how could you take that original idea that your team put in a charter, that your team talked about, how could you take that and make it more complex? That's the third step. So if what you talked about initially was drill and practice, which is at the understanding level, and you wanted to make that more complex, you could, for example, I once taught opportunity for 7th and 8th graders, which was your last opportunity to get your act together before they kicked you out of junior high. And I had a kid come to me one day. We had just started using a spreadsheet program. This kid, Peter, and Peter was a scammer and a schemer. And he said to me, you know, I've been thinking about that spreadsheet thing, and I think I could do my math homework with that spreadsheet thing, if you would let me do it. And I said, yeah, I think you probably could, Peter. You want to try? And he said, yeah, I do. I said, cool, go for it, but you have to write the formulas. So he went off happy as a clam, thinking that he had pulled the wool over my eyes because I was going to let him use the spreadsheet, not realizing I didn't care how many problems he solved. If he could come up with the formula that was going to make it work, I was all over it. So would that be an example of how you take something that's very low level and turn it into something that's at the creating level? Yeah. So you can. It's the difference between, God help us all, you doing one more Kahoot quiz with your kids. I guess my bias is pretty clear there. Or having them create Kahoot quizzes for everybody else. Okay? I mean, it's that simple. You do not have to spoon feed them everything. Let them be the creators, and you take what was a mundane, fairly boring activity. I've actually had kids that I've worked in, a lot of times I work in schools and I work with the kids for fairly long periods of time. And I'll walk in and they'll say, you're not going to do one of those quiz things, are you? And I'll say, no, I'm not. Oh, thank you. Because they have been online quizzed pretty much to death. But if you will give them the opportunity to take something that we typically have created for them and allow them to do the creating themselves, it makes a world of difference. And it's a very minor kind of tweak, and yet it really changes everything about what you're doing. So now I realize that that was a very, very, very quick overview. I'm sure you can imagine that when I'm working in schools with teachers, I spend a lot more time on this stuff. And then we actually create lesson plans. There's a template that's linked to the agenda that actually gives you places to put in, this is the technology, this is the content, this is the pedagogy, so that it walks you right through. and I share that with teachers, and I give them time to plan things, and then they teach it, and I go in their classroom, and I watch what they're doing, and I give them feedback, and I help them out. We're not going to get all that done today. But I hope that what I've done is give you a picture of what it could be, and I've given you resources that you are welcome to take back and use with your colleagues, and start thinking more about what are some of the techniques that you can use. We have about a minute and a half. So I'd like to just thank you all. If anybody has a question or anything, I'll be here. I really appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you very, very much.